Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Koskinen, one of the potential vulnerabilities that concerns me about is that government employees have access to the federal system to access their personal emails, Facebook, websites, online shopping using the federal network. Has the IRS taken any action to restrict access by their employees?
I'm not sure. In other words,
do you allow your employees to use the federal network for personal use?
no, actually, you can't do personal email at home, and your government email is to be used for government purposes. We are very strict about no one does work on their own personal computer. They may do other things with their personal computer, but basically we restrict websites. We are actually now taking another look at should we restrict even access to more websites than there are now. But as a general matter, people do their personal work on their personal computers, do office work on their office computers.
Thank you. Do you have a written policy that you could provide the committee?
I'm sorry?
A written policy to that effect?
Written policy about that? I'd be delighted to provide that to you.
Thanks, sir. Last week I had the opportunity to tour the Center for Information Assurance and Joint Forensics Research at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. The center is doing fantastic work under the in the cybersecurity field, producing talented students with the ability to make a real difference in the fields under the leadership of Gary Warner. The thing that disturbed me in this is that despite the government's tremendous need for individuals with this skill set, the director of the center explained that he has students applying for jobs at the federal agencies who don't hear back from them for months, and they wind up getting jobs in the private sector. And I'm talking about some of the very best. Right. I want to know if the IRS has taken any steps to expedite the interview process for people with a skill set that we definitely need.
All right. Well, certainly in that area, as a general matter, as I say, our problem is we're not hiring very many people at all. We'll shrink by another 2,000 to 3,000. The only way we've been able to deal with the budget cuts, since 70% of our budget is people, is simply not replace people. That's how we've shrunk by that much. But IT is an area where we're trying to hire. The process you mentioned is, in fact, when you apply for a job in the government, you go into the normal process. It takes 3 to 6 months. Many times it's several weeks or months before you hear back when you've applied. And it's why, as we discussed earlier, for us at the senior level of trying to get the best people, the streamlined critical pay authority is so critical, because nobody's in greater demand than cybersecurity experts. Mm-hmm. And if we tell them it's going to take you 3 to 6 months, but just sit tight and we really want to hire you, by the time we get back to them, they're not there anymore. And I think that I take your point.
Yeah.
We have fewer than 300 people under age 25 in the agency because we've not been able to hire. So those are exactly the kind of people that we would love to hire, we ought to be hiring, and that we ought to be able to try to figure out how to get into the system.
Madam Chairman, I don't know what our responsibility would be through the committee, but I would like to recommend that we develop a procedure that would expedite the interview process for such critical personnel, so that we could get those more of those highly skilled people into places where they can help protect our IT systems. Mr. Will Hewson, according to your testimony, the IRS estimated it prevented or recovered $22.5 billion in fraudulent ID refunds, identity theft refunds in 2014, but paid $3.1 billion in fraudulent refunds. I don't know if the GAO has looked into this, but those numbers are fairly obvious. It's money that's leaving the system. But do you have any idea what it costs the IRS to engage in prevention and recover activities? Because that's an additional cost to the federal government.
I do not.
Mr. Chairman Koskinen, do you?
On cybersecurity, on cybersecurity generally, we spend about $150 million a year just on cybersecurity. On all of we have about 3,500 people working on identity theft devoted to that. We've never pulled together the full cost of protecting against identity theft and refund fraud, but it's obviously money well spent if we were able to stop 25 billion from going out the door. Earlier there was a question on how accurate are those numbers. We're pretty good at knowing which refunds we stopped. The point is a good one. We can tell which refunds got out when somebody, a legitimate taxpayer, comes in. There's always an uncertainty of which fraudulent refund went through where there was no competing filing. Those are the ones you don't know.
What I'd like for you to do, if you don't mind, is to provide the committee with at least an estimate of what you're spending on recovering fraudulent refunds. Madam Chairman, if I may, I have one more question. Mr. Wilhusen, in the area of information security controls, how many recommendations has the GAO made to the IRS, and how many of those recommendations remain unimplemented, and how far back do those recommendations go?
Okay, we have recommendations that remain outstanding and open that go back to our report in 2011 and 2012, and so some of those recommendations actually pertain to filing seasons or fiscal years from like 2010, 2011. We have right now 94 open recommendations, but that includes 45 new recommendations that we just made in March. And so other than those, we do have 49 other recommendations that have been open for over a year.
Mr. George, the same question. Recommendations from the IG's office?
Yeah, I don't have off the top of my head the exact number, but there are quite a few, and we have, for the benefit of the IRS, prioritized those recommendations. Well, I was just pointed out that as of March of this year, the IRS has 23 open recommendations from 14 audits that we've provided them between the years 2008 and 2016.
My final question, and I promise this is the final one, is to follow up to Chairman Koskinen. Why is the IRS unable to implement these GAO and IG recommendations? And assuming that the agency concurs with them, when do you expect the IRS to fully and successfully comply with GAO and TIGTA recommendations?
As I say, we value the partnership. I've always been a fan of internal auditors in the 20 years in the private sector as well. Our analysis is, for another purpose, was that we've had about slightly over 2,000 recommendations from the IG and GAO across a wide range of areas, and about 80% of those have already been implemented. In the security area, again, and the IG has started moving that way, for both GAO and the IG, the ability to prioritize those for us as to which they think are the most critical allows us to then prioritize our work. We're limited, obviously, by just time as well as resources, but time is one of them. But we are committed in the security area to implement those as quickly as we can, and we will be providing Congress a report as quickly about the most recent GAO recommendations. The process is we then, after 60 days afterwards, provide GAO and the Congress. Our timeline is to exactly what the recommendations are and when they'll be implemented, and we'll be providing you that report.
Well, my final comment would be this, that when you have recommendations from the IG's office that go back to 2008, that would indicate to me no intention to implement them. I yield back. Thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chairman.